The early things I recall and the great pleasures I had when I was a little boy was going fishing with my father up the Monastash Canyon. And he'd be working all day, and in the afternoon I'd go out in the back lot with a swatter and I'd get a box full of grasshoppers, and I'd tag along with him up the Monastash, which was a beautiful canyon close by. And I sort of, all my recollections always tie up with the Monastash. And as I grew older, I still would go up there all the time. I still do to this day. Every time I go home, I go up there. And when I got to, into my teens, I guess, or early teens, like all boys, I got to wondering, what in the world could I do to make a living and live in the mountains? That was what I wanted most of all. And I'd sit there. I can remember sitting by the river up there thinking about it, what I could do. Because, putting it another way, when I'd lay on the ground up there and I could smell the pine needles and the sage and hear the water swirling around the rocks, that's when something touched me. And that's when I felt the best. And one day, I got to thinking about it, and I always liked to draw pictures. I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll paint pictures, and then I can live wherever I want to live. And I was so young and dopey, I didn't know that you can't do that. But that's what I wanted to do, and that was the thing behind everything to me. And I decided I'll do it. And I'll go where I have to go to learn to do it. And I'll do whatever I have to do to learn to do it. But that's what I'm going to do, is live in the mountains and paint pictures.
She was born the year Mozart completed his Mass in C minor. The Shoshone called her Grass Maiden. By the Minatari, she was known as Bird Woman. History remembers her as Sacagawea, Indian guide, American heroine. Now it is 1805. Jefferson begins his second term as president. Paganini's violin is captivating European concert audiences. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, with the help of Sacagawea, have reached the Pacific Ocean. She has never seen an ocean before. Suddenly she touches the great Western Sea. How did it feel, that moment? Perhaps we can never know, because she died so long ago, the year Huckleberry Finn was born. But isn't it important that we remember how a person feels? To remember a person is merely to be aware of history. To remember how a person feels his world is to make history and that person live again.
We knew where this had happened. I'd never seen a painting of it, and it seemed like something I really wanted to do. You knew exactly where she had walked because the creek that comes down in is called Cola Creek or Whale Creek. And I would think if she'd lived in the plains all her life and had never been to the ocean, how wonderful it would have been, and what she must have thought walking along the surf and the roar of the surf and the sound of all the seagulls and all the other seabirds and that shushing noise that the water makes when it slides back on the top of the sand, and that soft sand. And I'd walk up and down there trying to think what it would have been like to her that had never been there and really didn't know what to expect when she did get there. What it would have been like. In my painting, I attempted to give her that light, unreal feeling that she must have had walking there in that soft, wet sand with all the birds and the sounds that would all be strange to her and must have been probably one of the most wonderful things that ever happened to her.
Each having a company of warriors in war garb, that is, naked except a single cloth and painted, carrying their war weapons, bearing their war emblems.
Sacagawea is just one of a great populace of epic characters that artist John Clymer and his historian wife Doris have gathered from history. Some, like Sacagawea and Lewis and Clark, are names we know. But most would have been forgotten had not the Clymers reached back and rescued them from where they dwelt. That distant place, the past. Since the beginning of human history, philosophers, scientists, spiritualists have been intrigued by the boundaries existing between the living and the dead. How can we bring back those whose lives have passed? How can we project ourselves backward in time to eras ended? Literature abounds with this theme. The Clymers have created a kind of time machine that makes the past live again before our minds. John Clymer's world is a tapestry woven through with rivers great and small. Time, wrote Thoreau, is a stream I go fishing in. John and Doris Clymer, too, are fishermen. They extract from times past a reality that we can almost touch. They show us how it felt to be alive and free in the American West when it was still possible to be alive and free.
There were no roads, the rivers were the roads. And they followed rivers completely. All things started with animal trails. The animal trails through the mountains were always the easily traveled lower passes. Then the Indians followed the animals. The trappers followed the Indians. The traders then that came out, like the Oregon Trail, followed the trails made by the mountain men, like Sublette and Stewart around South Pass. And now our highways follow the same roads that originally were the animal trails. And to me, this has always been interesting.
The interest of an artist creates a new perspective before our eyes. Past and present are a single road. History was just a moment ago. At the western reach of the trail Lewis and Clark followed to the sea, there is a fort the explorers built to shield them from the winter. Forts like these that survive, ruins, artifacts, gravestones, museums, diaries. All these are tools the artist employs to lend flesh and soul to the bones of history.
We've been to Fort Clatsop many times. And you go into the fort and you look at it and you go into the little rooms where they had to live and the little rooms where they tried to smoke the meat and couldn't because it was just too wet there, you know. The more and more you look at it and you go there, you get more and more involved in it and thinking about it, of what it would have been like. And then my job, I feel, is to recreate this as best I can, of the way, if you had walked in there, what it would have been like. And the little Clatsop Indians that came to visit, they were the little Indians that didn't go anywhere except in a boat, and they were little bandy-legged people, and they wove their clothes out of cedar bark, and their hats were made to shed the water, very much like the Orientals. Trying to involve yourself and relive it is the interesting thing, and make you feel as if you were there.
In London, the 11th Earl of Westmoreland founded the Royal Academy of Music, and Schubert was not finishing his Symphony No. 8 in B minor. The 11th Earl and his gentleman friends strolled the Strand in tall hats made of the skin of the beaver, a rodent which had become extinct in Europe. It was a fashion whim, beaver hats, like blue suede shoes. But it created Fiddlin' Red. It created the Mountain Men. Much of John Clymer's work tells us about how it felt to live a life in pursuit of the beaver in the American Northwest. The mountain men followed the beaver westward into secret places within the mountains. And in doing so, it was the mountain men who really opened the West, not by force of arms, but as pathfinders for the thousands of immigrants who poured over the trails to Oregon and California. Beaver hats. It was a fashion whim, like blue suede shoes, but it helped win a nation. The mountain men of the early 19th century were solitary figures, their lives spent in spectacular isolation. But once each year, they gathered at a rendezvous to sell their pelts, obtain supplies for the following year, and to feel for a while the presence of other human beings. Today, in a remote Wyoming valley hidden away from public view, the American mountain men gather at another rendezvous. Some are professional mountain men still. Others are historians or scholars. All are devoted to keeping a vanishing way of life alive. They are, then, spiritual allies of the Clymers. Much of the authenticity of their lifestyle has been gleaned from Clymer paintings. On the other hand, he seeks them out to learn from their first-hand experience with a life lived very close to the earth.
So we've got 4 targets up there. See the orange
Oh yeah, I
dots
see.
on the
Yeah,
bank up
yeah,
there?
yeah.
And
buffalo silhouettes.
They're each going to take 5 shots, alternating. And this will settle the dispute as to which is the best shot.
Good.
For all time.
Not for now.
For now.
For now.
See.
The loser you know is going to come back.
Okay. All right.
You know what I told you? If it wasn't for the pork eaters, you guys know. Get more.
One way good south, just suck on the patch. Give me a little of that
What
patch.
are you putting in there, Tom?
100 grains.
100 grain.
Yeah, that's all I'm using in mine.
That's right. Get your bullshit.
This sure are expensive, though.
Mountain men, usually about once or twice every year, had everything stolen from them, and they had to start from scratch. They had to build everything they had, their clothes and a lot of their tools. They had to build from scratch. And the way they put up certain shelters for the wintertime, you have to sit and think, well, what would I do if I was there and I only had a knife and an axe? What would be available to me? And if I had it, how would I use it to the best advantage? Well, if a historical painting isn't accurate or as near accurate as you can make it, it isn't worth doing. I think we spend more time in researching a subject than in painting it. I have to put myself there to do these things.
Well, were the West Coast bulls longer than the Plains Indian bulls?
I don't think they were. I think that most of them were about like these.
About the same size?
Yeah, and shorter.
Yeah.
They're just wider on the northwest coast, aren't they?
Yeah, they were quite a lot wider.
Darling boy, and my mom's little darling boy, sing a little song called Soldier's Joy. Grasshopper sitting on a sweet potato vine, a grasshopper sitting on a sweet potato vine, grasshopper sitting on a sweet potato vine, long comes chicken and says he's fine.
Well, during the rendezvous, the Nez Perce camp would be way over in this area to the west, and the other two camps, the Bannocks and the other Flatheads, were over in this area. And there were hundreds of Indians and thousands of horses. And this would have really been a sight to see. And it was for an area from the Nez Perce clear up the valley for 6 miles. Would have been horses and teepees and trappers' camps. It would have been something.
Of the number assembled, there must have been not far from 100 Americans, hunters and trappers, about 50 French belonging principally to the caravan, some 5 traders, about 20 citizens or outsiders, including the mission party. The Snakes and Bannocks mustered about 150 warriors, the Nez Perces and Flatheads about 200. By arrangement among themselves, they got up a grand display for the benefit of their white visitors, which came off some 6 days after our American caravan had arrived at the rendezvous. It was then that the Indian finery was in requisition. Then the Indian women combed and braided their long black hair, tying the plaits with gay-colored ribbons, and the Indian braves tied anew their streaming scalp locks, sticking them full of flaunting eagle's plumes, and not despising a bit of ribbon either. Paint was in demand both for the rider and his horse. Gay blankets, red and blue, buckskin fringed shirts, worked with beads and porcupine quills, and handsomely embroidered moccasins were eagerly sought after. Guns were cleaned and burnished, and drums and fifes put in tune. The procession commenced at
Do you think I should put more things like drums and fifes and the whistles in there?
I think you should have some whistles and those little rattles like they used. Oh, dew claw rattles.
Yes.
We used a lot of those. And the whistles and maybe a flute or two.
I hadn't thought of doing it, but I think I will. I think I will.
With Doris's help, John Clymer is working on what may well be the most ambitious painting of his career.
Okay. I'll do it.
Because of the Clymers' insistence on historical accuracy, they visit the Plains Indian Museum at the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, Wyoming.
And Doris, she reads to me constantly. She goes with me and we visit all the museums in the different areas in the towns we go through that has any connection at all with any of the early events. We find the clothing, we find maps, we find their old tools. And there's no place that you can go, one place, and get all this. You get a little bit here and a little bit here and nothing here, and nothing here, and a little bit of something else here that you never saw. But over a period of years, you collect a lot of information. And you have to the best of your judgment, try to picture what did happen.
John's painting recreates an event which occurred at the 1836 Green River Rendezvous in Wyoming. When the missionary Narcissa Whitman arrived at the site, all the gathered Indian tribes honored her and her party with a grand parade. It was a great collision of cultures. John's painting seeks to capture a single instant in that buoyant, sweeping, spectacular encounter. John Clymer has been painting for some 55 years now, and there are those who say that for all those years, he has been working on each canvas backwards. Unlike most artists, who first paint their key figure or action and then build their painting around it, Clymer leaves his key figure to last. The logic is evident when you come with John to the Teton Peak which looms above his home. He often comes here to sketch. Although his Green River Rendezvous painting features mountains only in the far background, those mountains have a profound effect upon the appearance of the key figures in the painting. To feel the key figures, he must first feel the mountains that created them, that carved their faces, that choreographed the flow of their lives. And so, he paints the environment first, and then lets the environment create his people.
There's different ways of painting. Some you're showing what things look like to a viewer, and the other is that you participate yourself. And when you feel that you're in there and you're doing these things the way you would do them in the circumstances, then you're involved in it. And the viewer then is involved in it, and he feels that he's there when this is being done. And this is, to me, a very important thing, that we should be involved. And we should, if we're painting a man, we should be that man while we're painting it. Not just think what he looked like, but we should be that man.
In England, Beau Brummel died, and the ashes of Napoleon I were buried at the Invalides in Paris. Tchaikovsky, Monet, Renoir, Zola, and Thomas Hardy were welcomed to the human family on Earth. It was 1840. And here on the banks of the Arkansas in southeastern Colorado, there was a gathering of the boys at Bent's Fort.
Well, Bent's Fort was one of the very important old forts in early Western history because it was located on the Santa Fe Trail at a point where the cattle trails left Texas and came north to Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas. They crossed at this same point, and it was a great meeting place of all the cultures. They all were there.
It has been said that Bent's Fort was the very center of the Old West, in time and in space. Since John Clymer has said, "To paint a man, you must be that man," it leads us to examine his paintings more closely. Perhaps among the boys at Bent's Fort is an artist. Surely the Clymers are here, asking the people one more time how it was, how they fared, how they feel. Past and present are a single road. History was just a moment ago.